Hello, I'm Max Hollein, Director and CEO of the Met. Thank you for joining us for a special look at the exhibition Collecting Inspiration, Edward C. Moore at Tiffany Co. This installation explores the incredible impact and genius of one individual, Edward C. Moore. During the second half of the 19th century, his innovative vision propelled Tiffany Co. to become the preeminent designer and maker of silver in the world. Undeterred by the limits of existing technology, aesthetic sensibilities, or artistic education, Moore pushed the traditional boundaries of silver to create cutting-edge designs. This passion and determination were fueled by, and indeed mirrored in, Moore's collecting activity. Over his lifetime, he put together an impressive collection of works of art from ancient Greece and Rome, Europe, Asia, and the Islamic world, holdings that ranged from glass and ceramics to textiles, baskets, and metalwork. Behind every new acquisition was a desire to educate and inspire himself, as well as other designers, notably those he worked with at Tiffany. In the same way, the Met has long been proud to serve as a source for so many artists and designers, providing a place of cross-cultural and historical exploration and discovery. In turn, these artists bring new life to the collection, revitalizing these ideas through fresh perspective and the lens of the contemporary world. This was something Moore understood well. He stipulated in his will that his collection be given to a museum so that it could continue to be available to artisans and the public. When Moore passed away in 1891, the Met became the fortunate recipient of his diverse collection of over 2,000 objects and 500 books. This exhibition marks the first time since 1942 for a selection of these works to be displayed together, now shown alongside many magnificent examples of Tiffany silver objects created under Moore's direction. For the first time, we are able to witness directly the source and the product of such inspiration, offering an extraordinary glimpse of the role that historical and international design, particularly that of non-Western cultures, played in shaping new aesthetic sensibilities and the technical innovations required to achieve them. I'm now pleased to turn things over to the curator of this exhibition, Medill Higgins Harvey, Ruth Bigelow Riston, curator of American Decorative Arts, and manager, the Henry R. Luce Center for the Study of American Art, to take you through this landmark installation.
Collecting Inspiration is an exploration of the work of Edward C. Moore and the phenomenal collections that he assembled as sources of inspiration and education for himself and his staff. Edward C. Moore was a silversmith who pioneered entirely new ways of designing and making silver, and he served as the head of design and silver making at Tiffany Co. from the 1850s through his death in 1891. At the end of Moore's life, he owned over 2,000 objects, and we are showing here about 180 of them that he had given to the Met in dialogue with the silver that was produced under his direction. Collecting was what drove the innovations he pioneered in terms of design and making in silver at Tiffany Co. Moore's collection is incredibly diverse, both in terms of geography and time. He collected ancient Greek and Roman material, European glass, works from the Islamic world, as well as works from East Asia. He collected every possible media, ranging from glass to textiles, ceramics, metalwork, jewelry, and he is collecting things that speak to him because of how they're made, their form, their pattern, their ornament. All of this becomes fodder for his creative process. And he hopes to educate and inspire his staff to think and work in new ways. The aim of the exhibition is to explore the dialogues that occur between the collection and the silver that was designed under Moore's tenure, and to have the objects visible in a way that allows visitors to draw their own conclusions about the work. The exhibition begins with this Bryant vase, one of the grandest works made by Tiffany, and it is the very first example of American silver to be acquired by the Metropolitan-Museum. It was commissioned by friends of the poet and journalist William Cullen Bryant to mark his 80th birthday. William Cullen Bryant translated the Iliad and the Odyssey, so it was seen as a fitting tribute to his work. This vase was displayed at the 1876 Centennial Exhibition. It created a sensation. This was seen as the sort of most important, most magnificent work of silver produced at that moment. The vase is decorated with medallions that are scenes from Bryant's life, Bryant's portrait, and then the flowers are apple blossoms. We have corn. All of the iconography is speaking to both American identity and Bryant's work. This was critical to establishing Tiffany's reputation as the leading silversmith of the day. This case is a selection of Greek and Roman glass, and more of all of the areas of his collecting, he was particularly passionate about glass. It was the colors, the textures, the forms that could be achieved that clearly captured his imagination. And I want to draw particular attention to this beautifully rendered glass bowl, which is meant to replicate semi-precious stones. More would have been transfixed by the color and tonal variations and the sorts of patterns that are achieved in this work. It's a star of our collections and speaks eloquently about the kinds of work that inspired Moore. So this tiny mustard pot is an example of the way Moore is translating what he's seeing in glass into metal work. He's using various different metal alloys, and if one looks closely, the areas that at first look entirely one color of black are in fact a couple of different alloys, and those subtle variations clearly drew his attention in the glass are becoming expressed in an object like this. Here we have a wonderful dialogue between Greek and Roman vases in Moore's collection and the silver. The forms are clearly inspired by vases, but in addition, the decorative motifs are all taken, adapted, used in very different ways, but this offers a dialogue that tells you a lot about the creative process. To bring this exhibition into being required an incredibly large team to support that work. Denise Bayezi is a curator of Islamic art here at the Met, and she brought her expertise to bear in considering Moore's collecting in the world of Islamic art.
Moore is one of the pioneering collectors of Islamic art at the time, and I think, to me, what stands out in his collection is that in Islamic art there is this omnipresence of color and different techniques, very sophisticated. And he really got that. He was fascinated about this. He
clearly had an abiding passion for the polychromy that one finds in all of the works of art in the Islamic world.
And that's exactly what, in the end, transformed his own creations. This is a very interesting object. It's a so-called tray stand from the 14th century, made in Egypt. And I think what really captured Moore here is the refinement of the inlaying of silver and copper, the use of color metal applied to the brass, but it's the refinement also in the details. And that you only understand when you get close. These are bold inscriptions. And to me, that's kind of also very interesting because he wasn't able to read that, but he always picked the best pieces.
But the beauty and the quality of the workmanship spoke to him and motivated a new way of working.
Exactly. I mean, I think he had a very kind of artistic eye, the way he chose the objects. And it's thanks to that now we have one of the best collections of this kind of inlaid metalworking. He was really ahead of his time putting together this collection. Look at this tea set. Here you really see the result of the inclusion of color into shape on the silver. How did you do that?
This was the result of a tremendous amount of experimentation. Having seen works like the tray stand, they began to experiment with inlaying copper and the black compound is niello. And there are fascinating records describing the fact that under heat, the copper scavenges the niello. So they had to have fine lines of silver.
I can really imagine that people who would see these silver pieces, that they must have been kind of really astonished. It really looked so different from what they were used to see.
They were entirely revelatory, and Tiffany had introduced something brand new to the silver world.
This is probably the iconic object in the collection of Edward C. What we see here is a footed bowl, a so-called taza, from the mid-13th century in Syria, which was a time when this technique of enameled and gilded glass really began to flourish.
I'm fascinated by the fact that this was quite a well-known object when Moore acquired it.
Oh yes, this was one of the star pieces at the time. I mean, it was first shown in the Exposition Universelle in Paris in 1867, and when the collection of Edward C. Moore entered the museum in 1891, they called it the gem of his collection.
You can just see how this bowl would have prompted all of his team to come to understand and work to achieve enameling in silver.
No, absolutely. And I think it was this admiration for this technique of enameling, which in the Islamic world was really mastered to perfection. What I think is really fascinating is that Moore, he was not a glassmaker, but he kind of almost not revived this technique, but integrates it into American silverware, which is a very complex artistic process.
He is going to take ideas from every possible media and find ways to make it inform what he's doing with silver. Monica Binchuk is another colleague who was central to the planning and execution of this exhibition and is an expert in Japanese decorative arts. This gallery is devoted to Moore's collection of works of art from East Asia and their dialogue with the silver produced in response. Monica, you provided the context in terms of both understanding these objects and their meaning and resonance in Japan, but also to contextualize Moore among other collectors of the day.
He had a unique approach because he was an artist, so he looked at these artworks as a source of inspiration and design based on how the object looked. So he was not really interested in the cultural context. He was not really interested how the objects would have been used in Japan or what was the Japanese reception of these objects. He sort of took them out from the Japanese context and was able to reinvent them within his own artworks and within his own artistic vocabulary. So these examples are called inro, and most of them come from the Edo period. These beautiful objects were worn by men, mainly samurai. The Japanese have a special connection to nature, so they use materials taken from nature, but they also depict animals, vegetables. So these were all new approaches for the Westerners, and some of these were just humorous, some of these were sort of a revelation to a new approach to art.
All of those motifs are present in the silver throughout this section of the exhibition. So here we have the centerpiece of Tiffany's display at the Paris Fair of 1878, with which they announced to the world that they had mastered the various Japanese techniques of metalworking. And it's often described as the conglomerate vase because it combines a whole host of these various different techniques, from mokume to various different alloys that render metals slightly reddish, slightly blue. What do you see here in terms of how it speaks to the objects in his collection?
So it's really a hybrid artwork because from a point of a Japanologist, I immediately recognize the gourd pattern, which is also popular in Japanese decorative arts. I recognize the vine, I recognize the dragonfly pattern, and also the Polonia flower, which was a very important family crest in the history of Japan. But then when I have a closer look, I realized that it was not made by a Japanese artist, and the composition is uniquely Western.
This is one of my favorite pieces in Moore's Japanese collection.
It is actually a Meiji period piece made in the 1870s by Makuzu Kozan, a very well-known potter. The design is a procession of insects imitating samurai culture. It was inspired by paintings by Maruyama Okyo, a painter based in Kyoto. So you can see grasshoppers carrying flowers as weapons or insignia.
The quality of the decoration and the wonderful whimsy of these grasshoppers playing human roles speaks volumes about the kind of interests and tastes that Moore cultivated throughout his collection.
The quality is excellent, the design is fresh, and represents a new trend in pottery in Japan. It's really one of the highlights of the Moore collection.
It makes me think about this pufferfish sugar bowl and this froggy creamer. The idea that animals can have a life that engages with the human world and the attention to every detail so that they are at once silly but totally naturalistic. And I think a lot of that is indebted to what he's seeing in Japanese art.
In Japanese painting and decorative arts, there is a very long tradition of depicting animals with human qualities, with personalities, and very often making fun of humans, whether it's a samurai or commoner. And I totally recognize that aspect in these works.
One of the most astonishing innovations that was achieved at Tiffany under Moore's direction was the ability to make metalwork have this lustrous red color that we see here, inspired by kimono, lacquerware. So what we're looking at is a vase that has a patinated copper surface with this trompe-l'oeil drips of silver animating the form. Every detail was carefully scripted. In addition, there are diaries recording what some of the sources of inspiration were, and they talk about Moore bringing into the design studio a Japanese bronze vase with drip ornament, which is the object in the adjacent case. Because what Moore was doing at Tiffany was so incredibly inventive, we also created a video alcove with a series of videos we commissioned that demonstrate how the various decorative techniques were achieved. So these are the largest known works by Tiffany Co. in this era. These grand candelabra were made as a special commission for Tiffany's most progressive patron, a woman named Mary Jane Morgan, who, like Moore, collected works from East Asia. These combine a lot of the ideas that we've seen throughout the exhibition in that the forms were described as quote-unquote Roman, the ornament is drawing on East and West Asia. The upper portions of them can be lifted off and placed onto a dining room table. Each of them weighs about 100 pounds, and they really reward close looking. The attention lavished on every blossom, leaf, the strands of hair on the female figures speaks to the level of workmanship and passion that are manifest in all of Tiffany's work in the 19th century. The exhibition concludes with the Magnolia vase, which was the centerpiece of Tiffany's display at the 1893 Columbian World's Fair. And although that occurred after Moore's death, Moore had completely designed and conceived this vase as sort of his final project. The vase is meant to represent the United States, and the form is inspired by Native American pottery. The decoration represents all of the parts of the nation, with the Northeast around the neck with the pine needles and pine cones. The magnolias that decorate the body of the vase represent the South, and the cacti on the lower portion of the vase represent the West. Traditionally, enamels are shiny, and in order to represent the velvety matte texture of magnolias, They experimented over a year in order to change the luster and affect of enamel by using fluoric acid to create these lovely matte decorations. The technical virtuosity of this and the ambition both represent Moore's lifetime of creative endeavor and also speak to the legacy he left behind and the individuals that he had trained and mentored who carried this vase to completion and then continued his work in the ensuing decades. Moore's story and the story we're telling with this exhibition is very much a part of the aims of the Metropolitan Museum, that cross-cultural, cross-historical dialogues, inspiration from art from various moments in time and geographies can speak in different ways to all of the audiences that come into our galleries. At its essence, this exhibition is really about the creative process and the beauty that one finds in the world around them.
This fascinating project was conceived and realized by Medill Higgins Harvey and benefited from the collaboration and collective scholarship of many curators across the numerous departments that house the Moore collection within the museum. I'm very grateful to each of them, as I am to Sylvia Yond, Lawrence A. Fleischman, curator in charge of the American wing, for our stewardship of this project, and to the entire Met team that worked tirelessly to make this show and publication a reality. On behalf of the Met, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to our incredible sponsor and close partner, Tiffany Co, which provided leadership support and critical access to its archival holdings. The illuminating catalog is made possible by the William Cullen Bryant Fellows, and we are supremely grateful for their long-time dedication to the wing. On behalf of everyone at the Met, thank you for joining us.